Hello, David.
Hello.
Namaste. How are you? How are you doing, my friend?
I am very well. I'm here in southwestern Spain, and today actually the sun is shining, and I am looking forward to talking to you all about what I do and the joys of urban birding.
Fantastic, fantastic. And welcome, Gaurav. Welcome, Iqbal. Thank you for hosting this today. So, friends, ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
welcome.
Thanks.
We are in different parts of the world. I'm in southern India right now in a yogic retreat, trying to resurrect my body, mind, and soul in a yogic ashram, while Iqbal is in Noida in Delhi in our office, and Gaurav is in Pune, which is near Bombay, and David, of course, is many thousand miles away from us. And this entire webinar is to showcase David's work. So, friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Once again, we've got Deepak. Good evening, Deepak. Priya, Judy. Judy is from Warwickshire. Mahesh, Victor. Victor, welcome, Victor. A friend, Arun Gulati, Junaid, Deepak, Salil. Many people are here. Welcome, Kanishji. So you'd be, a lot of you maybe seen me a little after a while. This beard is because I'm on a yogic retreat, and I do yoga about 5 hours a day, and I'm detoxing. And I'm telling you, this part of the world is beautiful. It's absolutely magnificent. It's right by the sea, and there are lots and lots of birds around. And friends, if I go off air because there's a storm that's coming in, but David and Gaurav and Iqbal will continue. Let me quickly introduce myself to people who are here for the first time. I am Mohit Aggarwal, and I am professionally an experiential ecotourism specialist. I help people travel to some wonderful places in Asia. I'm on the board of Asian Ecotourism Network and GSTC's Trained and Certified Meet Sustainable Tourism. I'm the founder of Asian Adventures, a 27-year-old travel outfit, is the largest and #1 bird watching tour company in India. I'm also the founder of Netinetter, a digital marketing company that is working towards strengthening communication for ecotourism and conservation outfits. These companies are on a large mission to help Asian elephants with the corridors, free the Himalayas of plastic waste, help small wildlife NGOs, and conserve the ancient Himalayan shrines. So that's a bit about me. I'd like Gaurav to introduce David right away. Over to you, Gaurav.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thanks. So David Lindo, also known as the Urban Birder, he's a broadcaster, writer, speaker, educator, and bird tour leader. And his mission is to engage city folks like us around the world with the environment through the medium of birds and bird watching. He's written countless articles on urban birds and urban conservation and wildlife for websites, magazines, and other publications. And he's also written the forwards for several books. He's a regular TV and radio presenter and has been featured on the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 in the UK, as well as other TV and radio channels around the world, including CBS in the US. David was recently named as the 7th most influential person in wildlife by BBC Wildlife magazine. And in 2020, he was shortlisted for the Professional Publishers Association Columnist of the Year award. He sat as a judge for the prestigious Wildlife Photographer of the Year 2021 and Bird Photographer of the Year 2021. He's a fellow of the International League of Conservation Writers and a member of the British Travel Writers Guild. He's also the founder of the Tower 42 Bird Study Group and Britain's Vote National Bird campaign in 2015 that resulted in over 226,000 votes. He was awarded the prestigious H.H. Bloomer Award in 2021 by the Linnean Society of London and has a play based on his life as the Urban Birder. And which is currently being staged by the Rocklaw contemporary theatre in Poland. He's the author of the Urban Birder book in 2011 and other books, including Tales from the Concrete Jungle, Urban Birding, and How to Be an Urban Birder. So David will talk to us today about his amazing journey, and he'll also teach us a few tips to get us started in the urban art of urban birding. So over to you, David. Thanks.
Well, I don't know how to follow that, because when I hear all those things that you've read, I think, is that me you're talking about? Because I didn't set out to do all that. It's just happened. But anyway, thank you very much for allowing me to be here and to talk to you about my favorite subject, which I can talk about all year long. Forget about all day, all year long. And it's also good to see a number of my friends in the audience, including my good friend Nigel Mill, who's a very special friend of mine, but also a few other people I've noticed as well. So thank you, Victor Yu, for example. Thank you very much for attending. So I will start the presentation, and it's all about, now can you actually I've got to press word start, haven't I? It's all very technical here. It's all about my travels, effectively. But I suppose in my travels, I have learned, even myself, I've learned about urban birding. And as said earlier, I am very much about trying to engage people living in urban areas with birds and with the environment and with nature, and to connect them to this idea that their doorstep is actually eventually part of the Antarctic, the Congo, the Amazon, the Arctic. You know, it's all one and the same. We're not separate compartments. It's all intermerged. So that's one thing I'm trying to do, but through the medium of birds. So let's start at the very beginning. By the way, this particular picture, people often ask me about this. This was taken in London, in Notting Hill, the site of that famous film. Remember that film of the same name? And it's quite interesting to note that when looking up, very few people actually do look up. If you walk down the street, next time you walk down the street, just look at people and see how many people look up. You find that very few do. And I was lying on the floor, and only a couple of people, including that guy in the stripy shirt, they were the only people to look up. Everyone else ignored me or looked at me. So it's quite interesting to see how people behave sometimes. Anyway, I started my birding life a little while ago. I think I was born with I suppose, an innate interest in natural history. It didn't come from anywhere. It's just with me. I didn't have any mentors. My parents, their friends, my friends, no one had an interest in natural history, but I did. And it started off with invertebrates. It started with insects and spiders and worms and things like that in my back garden at the tender age of 4 or 5. And it was while watching those creatures and trying to plant vegetation myself to attract more, I realized that they were being fed on by birds. And that was when my interest really started blossoming. But of course, I had no one to take me anywhere. People from that day onwards told me that you can only see wildlife and birds in the countryside. You need to be there. You can't see them in the city. So I inadvertently became an urban birder. I started watching birds around me and realized fairly quickly that there was actually quite a lot to be seen. And I learned, one of my first lessons I learned was the fact that you need to look at your urban surroundings as if you were a bird. So you look at possibilities for food, possibilities for resting and nesting, and you see that they're all around us. Even the buildings that we live in could potentially be homes for birds. And the vegetation and the parks and the lakes and what have you around us can also act as good areas for wildlife. But I'll talk about that a little later. Anyway, by the time I was around 7, I discovered The Birds of Britain and Europe with North Africa and the Middle East, a book I found in the library. And I couldn't believe it, because at that point I knew nothing in terms of the names of birds. And then I found this book with over 1,000 species, and I couldn't believe it. I was reading this book like it was the Bible. You know, I read it word for word, and I knew every single species in this book. I knew all their scientific names. I knew how big they were in inches. I knew their distributions. You know, I even started writing notes to forecast what species will become a vagrant. You know, I was trying to write a list of birds, for example, for Iceland, and thinking, that could possibly turn up, you know, because the distribution is quite near. So I was thinking along those lines straight away. And then a year later, I came across Birds of Town and Suburb by the late, and in my opinion, great Eric Sims. He was a broadcaster, a writer, a sound recordist. He did a lot of work with the BBC, he did a lot of programs. And what I really enjoyed about him was the fact that he taught me through this book about the idea that birds are everywhere, even in the middle of the most unlikely places. And in this book, I was taught about finding local patches, finding somewhere that people would never think of in terms of birds, even if it's somewhere just around the corner from you, or if you have a garden, your garden, that's your patch. And then from there, watch it and just see what happens. And I think one really great example in my life was, and is still, my local patch in West London. Now, I don't know if you can see my cursor at all, but if you can see where it says Wormwood Scrubs Park, A219, just a bit south from that, you'll find an area of green. And that area is one of the only spaces of green in that particular vicinity. And then south of there, you've got the London Wetland Centre, which is that square block of blue, which is about maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles south. So there's nothing around. Yet this park, which I discovered, I found so many different things there. And I also learned about, even myself, I learned about looking up and the beauties of urban nature. Now, this site is around about 183 acres long, or big, should I say. It's pretty big for London, but it's not huge. And it's surrounded by a very thin belt of woodland, so thin that you can walk through it in around about 2 seconds. I mean, well, not 2 seconds, maybe 20 seconds. It's so thin, and it's also a very young area of woodland as well. The best areas within this whole park is in the in the west, where it says Wormwood Scrubs. So number 7, number 8, around that area are all good places, because they were the places where I really started discovering stuff. So I first turned up there over 25 years ago when I was very small, I must add. And I saw a site which, you know, you would never really expect wildlife to be in. Lots of football pitches, you know, as I said, a very small area of woodland, and there's also a very tiny grassland. But for me, it was an oasis. It was like I'd turn up there in the morning and I'd be transported from my life in London to somewhere completely different. And this was completely surrounded by urbanity. I mean, there was a prison on one end, there was housing at 2 ends, there was a major road, there was even a massive train station. So there was all sorts of things going on, lots of noise. But you can still be in this natural oasis in the middle of the city. And as soon as you start thinking to yourself that I can actually see birds here, that's when you start seeing birds. And that certainly happened. One of the first major discoveries I made was to find that this, which is a ring ouzel, my favorite bird, by the way, this bird, which is in Britain, only found in the sort of western and northern extremities, and it's very scarce. I mean, there's less than 7,000 pairs now, very shy. But this bird, which I thought as a child I'd never see unless I went to those areas, this bird came to see me. My favorite bird came to see me. And plus, it sees me every year because it migrates. This species migrates from Northern Africa, Southern Europe into Britain. And in doing so, passes through urban areas. And it's hard to believe a bird that's found in such wild, mountainous, remote terrains can also be found right in the heart of a city, if you're lucky. I mean, you have to be in it to win it. You can't just expect them to turn up. You need to look for them and be around when they turn up. This particular species shows up normally in the penultimate week of April, and less so in the autumn. So I was really delighted every year when I saw this bird pass through. The more classic migrant, which is actually coming through as we speak, is the northern wheatear, another species which is just far more common than the ring ouzel. It's in Britain found in many regions, but in areas away from people normally when it breeds. But on migration, they come through urban areas, and you can come across this species on a football pitch in the middle of town. You know, anywhere with a bit of grass, you can possibly come across it during spring and autumn. And for me, especially in the spring, seeing a wheatear is the sign of spring. Nothing else matters to me. Forget about swallows. For me, it's the wheatear passing through. I know that spring is definitely on the way. And this bird is amazing. I mean, it's the longest in terms of migration. It flies the furthest of any small bird in the world. Some of these birds fly from Greenland all the way to southern Africa. It's incredible, fantastic, 18,000-mile round trip. Some of the other residents, I mean, I've seen maybe 150 different species here at Wormwood Scrubs, and there's no water on site at all. Yet I've seen maybe 12 or 15 different species of wader, including common sandpipers and black-tailed godwits and even whimbrel. I thank the Thames and also the London Wetland Centre, which I told you about earlier, because I think a lot of these birds are drawn to those areas and pass overhead. But it also shows you that anything can turn up anywhere at any time, and also to look up, because if you don't look up, you won't see the flocks of dunlin flying over. You need to be looking up to see these things. But one of the emblems of this site is a bird that you guys over in India are very familiar with, the rose-ringed or ring-necked parakeet. As you probably know, it's a big, it's become very successful elsewhere in the world. I think it's the most northerly parrots in the world now. And there's a very large population in southern England that's grown from practically nothing. And the thing is, it's not one of my favorite birds, I must say. I prefer to see them in India than to see them in Croydon or somewhere in South London. I'd rather see them in their natural habitat. I always have a strange feeling about seeing a parrot in a place where they shouldn't be. But the good thing about these guys is that in the evenings, they gather in flocks. They roost in large numbers on the Wormwood Scrubs, up to 5,000 during the winter every night. And they are a spectacle. You know, people who aren't interested in birds normally gather when they're walking their dogs to watch these birds fly in their groups of hundreds and then land in the roost and squawk away. It's quite a spectacle. And it's a great way for people to be introduced to the idea of nature on their doorstep. You know, it's a great doorway. It's a great entrance, a great conduit into the world of nature. And if that's the result of these guys being here, then they can stay, as far as I'm concerned. Whilst before we actually came live, I was chatting to the guys about my current situation. Even though I was born and bred in London, I'm currently not in London. I'm in Spain, and this is Spain. I'm in Spain, and I'm in a region of Spain called Extremadura. Now, some of you may be familiar with this region. It's in the southwest. And again, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but if you can see in the southwest, Badajoz, it's written Badajoz, but Badajoz, which is how they pronounce it here. It's on the border of Portugal. That is basically Extremadura. It's the 5th largest region in Spain. And Spain is a pretty big place. I mean, not by Indian standards, but certainly by European standards, it's a big place. And this is the region in total, Extremadura. And I don't know if you can notice in the middle, near the smack bang in the middle, Merida, that's where I'm talking to you from now. And it's the capital of the region. And it's a beautiful region. I've been sort of visiting for the last 11 years now, and I've been here since the beginning of the pandemic. So I've been around here for 18 months, but it's a stunning place. And many people who know or think they know Extremadura, and that includes many Spanish people, think that it's just this. It's just a burnt area, you know, because it does get pretty hot in the summer, up to 44 degrees of dry heat, and everything goes blonde during the summer. But the thing is, there is such a range of habitats, not just these grassland areas, but there's mountains, you know, there's reservoirs, lots of reservoirs actually, and there are forests. There's all sorts of areas within the region. It's such a diverse place. And I spent a lot of my time, especially during lockdown, being in Merida and the surrounding countryside. And I just had, I had a bike and that was it. So I'd travel around inside the city as well as on the edge, just looking for birds. And I tell you what, there are lots of birds around, and there's lots of beautiful scenery to look at and lovely vegetation as well. One of the classic birds of the region is the cattle egret, which I'm sure is a very well-known bird in India, even though, is it the eastern cattle egret you have there? Anyway, this is the western cattle egret, a bird that's spread and is spreading north as well. We're getting them more and more in England. In fact, I think they're breeding in England now, and there's, people can actually see them now. Whereas I don't think I've only ever seen cattle egret once in my life in Britain, and that was when I came back last year, and I saw a flock that had settled somewhere in southern England. So a very famous, popular bird in the region. Lots of other species to be found, including the blue throat. In northern Extremadura, there's a range of mountains called the Gredos Mountains, which actually kind of carry on towards Madrid in the northeast. And there is a population of blue throats which actually have totally blue throats and not with a white spot or a red spot. And there's talk of them actually being declared a different species. But anyway, blue throats themselves are very common visitors in the winter in some of the rice fields and marshy areas, even in the city. Another bird that's actually currently doing the rounds at the moment, coming back, is the lapwing, the northern lapwing, a bird that is a winter visitor mostly for the region. And in fact, they call it ave fria, cold bird, because it comes in the winter. For me, I'm used to seeing them in Britain during the summer and having an amazing, display flight they do and the call they do. But here in Extremadura, I've got to know them. I'm accustomed to them as being a winter visitor. But even then, they start turning up in July. So winter comes early for some shorebirds. Other shorebirds that I've noticed around the actual city and even inside the city, this is a flock of ruff. Ruff get everywhere. I've seen ruffs all over the place. This is one day I went to a reservoir local to the city, and I came across a flock of 180 ruff that just come in from their breeding grounds in Eastern Europe. So it's amazing to see them, and they are a bird that we see a lot here, especially this time of year. Black-headed gulls are another regular species. There's only two main sort of gull species in the region. Black-headed gull and lesser blackback gull, but I've seen other species like little gull and Mediterranean gull, as well as yellow-legged gulls. And here is a black-headed gull in company with a couple of ruff, or 3 ruff actually. This year, or this time of year, in fact, no, November, next month, the month after next, even, wishing my life away here now. In November, we will expect the first of the cranes to come back. And common cranes, they're amazing. I mean, Extremadura is a very important place for wintering common cranes. I think it's got one of the largest populations of wintering cranes in Europe, approaching 200,000, at least 150,000. And here in Spain, they are viewed and called ladies in grey. They're viewed with reverence because people think they're graceful, and they're welcomed back every winter. And then in March, they move on north back to their breeding grounds. So let me tell you a bit more about my local patch, I suppose. The whole city is my local patch. This is Merida, and this is the Roman Bridge, a spot that if you do come to Extremadura as a birder on a tour, then it's normally one of the days on the itinerary to visit the bridge. The Roman Bridge is the oldest and longest Roman bridge in the world, and it's obviously still in use. It's 2,000 years old, but from that bridge you can see so much. I mean, I've walked literally 20 meters in half an hour and have seen 20 to 30 different species without even sort of breaking into a sweat. So there's so many birds to see, and I often bring groups to come and look over the bridge into the reed beds and on the river itself, as well as on the outskirts of the river. So I got a patch. I walked the patch along this municipal park to this bridge, and actually when I get to this bridge, it's all very manicured, but thereafter it becomes a little bit more wild, I suppose. And it's been incredible for the last few years, the amount of birds that I have actually come across within this region of the city. I think in 1 year I had 120 different species in 1 year, and that was when I wasn't actually living in the city. It's just when I was visiting, and I think I visited maybe 12 or 15 times during the course of the year and saw 120 different species. So it just shows you how rich this area is. It's a fantastic area, for urban birds. And I've just, hang on, press the wrong button there. So basically, yeah, one of the main species of birds of prey to be seen along the river is the western marsh harrier. Other birds of prey include the occasional lesser kestrel. We have a very small population in Merida itself, but lesser kestrels themselves are mainly found in urban areas within Extremadura. And in fact, there are 19 different special bird areas in the area of Extremadura which have been recognized. And half of those, in fact, most of those actually were in urban areas. So it shows you how important the urban areas are in Spain and in Extremadura. House martins are one of the main birds you'll be seeing when you go to Extremadura and when you hang out in Merida. I remember when I first came to Merida, looking at buildings and seeing so many different nests of house martins. I mean, one time I saw two sides of a building which had nearly 400 nests, which actually, at least 5 or 6 years ago, would have been double the number of nests in the whole of London on just two sides of one building. It's incredible. So they nest, they're very common. They have shown a slight decline, and also worryingly, there's some people who have taken to, or probably have always done this, knocking down their nests because they didn't like the fact that they pooped on their balconies, which is a real shame, and it's actually against the law, but people do it, which is a very frustrating thing. Another common bird in the region, in the city, is the Seron, Europe's smallest finch, European Seron, and it's got a very tinkly little call. And again, as I say, very common, seen in all the parks, and often, like sitting here in my apartment now, I can often hear them flying overhead or even singing from the TV aerials. Alpine Swift is another resident of the city. It actually nests under the Roman bridge, as well as a couple of other bridges that span that river, which, by the way, is called the Guadiana River, and it runs all the way to Portugal, so it's a very long river. The Alpine Swift is one of the last of the species of swifts that we have to go. We have the common swift and also the pallid swift and the white rump swift. The white rump swift is quite localized, found in a couple of the more mountainous areas where castles are, such as the famous Monfragüe. I don't know if you've heard of that area, but it's a very famous spot that people go to when they come to Extremadura, and you can possibly see white rump swift there. But the Alpine Swift hang around until sometimes into November. So I, for example, saw quite a few of them even yesterday. Another common bird along the watercourses and also in the city occasionally is the black-winged stilt, a bird that I'm sure you know very well in India, but it's also moving south, or should I say north. I think could be a case of global warming, but you know, there's birds that turn up in the UK and they're more frequent these days now. I think there's always birds in the UK at some point during the spring. Another species that's increasing and heading north is the black-crowned night heron. And the species that, you know what, the first one I ever saw was actually on Hawaii, of all places, but they're found across the world. Truly a cosmopolitan species. And it's really great to stand on the Roman bridge and to see these birds in the reeds. And below them, occasionally, you have the magnificent, so mixing my Spanish up with my English there, the magnificent western swamp hen, which it's like a moorhen on steroids. I mean, I've often been with people who, not seen one before, and they're standing on a bridge. Is that one? Is that one? And they see moorhens, common moorhens, and then suddenly this monster steps out of the reeds with massive toes and big beak, and you think, oh no, that's a swamp hen. Incredible birds. And the Roman Bridge in Merida is one of the best places in Extremadura in order to see the species, if you want to come and look for them. Another increasing species in number is the Glossy Ibis. I've noticed over the last 5 or 6 years that the numbers have increased, and there's more breeding within the city along the river, along with the Egrets and Herons. I find them very attractive. I think they're even though they've got a horrible voice, I think they're very attractive birds, and it's really interesting that they feed on the American signal crayfish, which is an alien import. They seem to have developed a taste for them, and they eat them quite extensively, and it's probably why they've become quite common as well. In the bushes, we have quite a few smaller songbirds. Too many to mention now. I mean, at the moment, as the passage of warblers happening, I've been seeing things like Western Orphean warbler and spectacle warblers and Iberian chiffchaffs as recently as yesterday. Lots of birds moving through the city on the way south. This one hangs around all the time. It's the Chetty's warbler, another species which is actually, the family is predominantly Asian. I think this is the only representative from this side of the world. And it's a bird that certainly in Britain we celebrate. They've been around since the 60s in Britain and are slowly increasing. But here in Extremadura and certainly in Merida, you can't go a day without at least hearing one or two of them. During the summer, we have another great migrant come through and breed. This is the black kite. Again, very familiar in India. Very common here in Spain, often seen along the motorways, feeding or trying to feed on the roadkill, of which there's many carcasses on the roads, unfortunately. So they come in number to breed, and they are gone by mid-August. I mean, they just disappear back to Africa, and they create vast roosts. There's a roost just on the edge of Merida where I've seen up to 500 of these birds, and it's fantastic to watch them all flying around and then settling down in the trees. But as I say, in August, they disappear, mid-August, and then there's a month where there's pretty much no kite activity at all. And then from around about now onwards, we get the first of the red kites coming through. We get red kite from the north, from Scandinavia and Germany, and they come and winter in the region. They're nowhere as common as the black kites, but there are still quite a few to be seen. Up there in the sky with the black kites are griffon vultures. We have a fantastic population in Extremadura. I think, in fact, I heard a very sad fact. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that there are more vultures in Extremadura than there is in the whole of India. Please correct me, but if that's true, that's such a sad state of affairs. We have, I think, nearly 4,000 pairs of griffon vultures. These birds can be seen flying over urban areas all the time. And along with them are black vultures, which have a discontinuous distribution from Iberia through to Mongolia. They're also called cinereous vulture, and monk vulture is another name for them as well. In Extremadura, we have perhaps 900 plus pairs, and I believe it's the largest population in the world. And again, there's no way you'll miss them. If you came, even if you hung out in the city, you'll see them. In fact, there's a dump just outside the city, and I see them all the time at the dump and get them flying over really low overhead. Great opportunity for photographs as well. Fantastic birds. Europe's largest raptor, and in a field, it looks like a sheep. It's massive. An endemic for the region is the Iberian magpie. Interestingly, not so common in Merida. I don't see a huge number yet further north, there's another city called Catharas, and I see them in the city centre like magpies, like common magpies. So it's really interesting why they're not so prevalent in my city. Beautiful bird, lovely to watch. Another great bird is the European bee-eater, all gone now. They normally disappear in mid-August, and I look forward to hearing their calls in April, May next year. And they breed nearby in the sandbanks and areas of excavation around the edges of the city. Another bird which is normally associated with the countryside, certainly in the UK, is the corn bunting. They're very common here, very, very common, although they have shown a decline, unfortunately, in recent years. But I see them also in the winter in the urban areas, and they are, for me, a joy to see, even though they're not particularly brightly coloured. And I think the final bird that denotes winter for me here in Extremadura, and certainly in Merida, is the black redstart. They haven't started coming back yet. They should be here any day now. And then during the course of the winter, they're all over the place. I get them on the roof everywhere. Elsewhere in Extremadura, you see them breeding in the mountain areas and in the mountain villages. But in the lowland areas like here, they are winter visitors. So I'm very happy to see them when they come. So that's, in a very quick nutshell, where I'm living now. And I treat the whole city as my local patch. So I don't just go to the famous places like, sorry about the noise there, because people are putting their shutters down. I don't just go to the famous places like the Roman Bridge. I like to go to spots that people do not think of, like areas of rough ground, you know, local parks where there's people even, because even in those areas, you can find birds. I want to take you somewhere else that I really am quite fond of, and it's the island of Taiwan. I'm not sure if anyone's been there, but I spent some time hanging out in Taipei. I've been there a couple of times now. And Taipei is in fact, Taiwan itself is a fantastic place for birding. For me, it's a mixture of European birds, but with Asian subspecies, and full-on Asian birds that I'd never see unless I went to that part of the world. Plus the added bonus of birds that are rare or very rare in my part of the world, but also found here in Taiwan. So you've got 3 different things going on at once. So it's quite confusing. This is a Maroon Oriole, very similar in sound, I suppose, to the Golden Oriole, but very different looking. And they also have, going back to the European thing, this is a coal tit, believe it or not, with a massive crest, but it's a coal tit. It's the race that's found in that part of the world of coal tit. What's interesting, and I love telling people in the UK this, is the fact that in the UK there are in fact 2 species of tit with crests. And most people say straight away, oh, crested tit, but what's the other one? Well, actually, it's the coal tit. Even though the British coal tit doesn't display a crest like that, there is a tiny wisp of a crest, which you would notice if you were a ringer, for example, you'd notice. So next time you see a coal tit, if you live in the UK or Europe, have a look and see if you can see a small crest. But what I love, especially when I'm out and about in different countries and different cities, I love watching other people and their interactions with birds. And I remember being in a park in Taipei and watching, obviously birding, and then seeing this lady. She was taking pictures of the scenery, and she turned round to be surprised by a spotted nutcracker on the interpretation board. It just suddenly flew down and landed there. I didn't expect it myself, but instead of ignoring it, this woman, she just took her phone out and took a picture of it. And I thought, what a great piece of engagement, because that woman would go away with a picture of a spotted nutcracker on her phone, probably not knowing what it is, but it doesn't matter. It's the fact that she's engaged with nature that's made her one step closer to actually being in touch and actually on the same wavelength with nature. And that's a great thing to do. And I think it's fantastic that I witnessed that. One of the birds that most people in Taiwan, especially up in Taipei, will not notice, or should I say will not miss, is this. This is a white-whiskered laughing thrush. Over there, they call them the iPhone bird because you can't miss it. I mean, they don't really care about people, so you can actually get your iPhone and take a really nice picture of it, and it carries on its business as if you weren't around. Taiwan has a couple of endemics, and people out there are very interested in taking photographs, which is great. I mean, it's better than shooting wildlife. So you get groups of people gathering to take pictures of their 2 endemic pheasants. The first of which is this. This is Swinhoe's pheasant. Stunning. It is a word I'd use just to start describing it. It's just incredible to see in real life. Beautiful. And if you see it in poor light, the white on its back, the white on its tail just kicks out as a beacon. It's like looking at a badger almost. It's a very distinctive bird. And I was so happy to see this bird because they come to the roads to feed on grit, and there's a couple of spots that you can go to actually see them in action because they're kind of well-known places for them. The last time I came to Taiwan, I saw this guy. This is a Mikado Pheasant. It was a new bird for me, and again, this photograph does it no justice. It's absolutely stunning, and the blue plumage is like crushed velvet. It's such a gorgeous, stunning bird. I remember whilst waiting for this bird, happening to see the Taiwan partridge, which apparently is quite difficult to see. It was scuffling around with his friends in the undergrowth nearby. So that was a really nice bird to come across. But I talk about looking up the whole time, as you've noticed. But sometimes you need to look down, because if you look down, it could get you to look up. And I did just that when I saw that stuff on the floor and came across the Malaysian night heron. This is one in this nest. In Taipei, even though it's found in the whole of Southeast Asia, in Taiwan and in particular Taipei, it's one of the best places in Asia to see these species. And you see them in parks. They just stand out in the open with no undergrowth, and you can walk up to it and it'll stand and erect itself and open its wings as if it's in the middle of a reed bed, but there's no background behind it. It's just standing there. But they are very easy to see, and it's a really great way to sort of get into birding, especially if you live in that city and walk around and see these things. And I'm sure people do take them for granted, but for us people visiting from other countries, it's an amazing bird to actually come across. Okay, so I've kind of talked about a couple of places that have really tickled me or taken my fancy over the last few years. I mean, I could talk about 1,000 other places, to be honest, but no talk that I do could ever be complete without talking about Serbia. And I apologize in advance to those people who may have heard my Serbia story, because it's a story I've been saying repeatedly for the last 12 years now, because I was so taken by what I saw when I arrived there. So Serbia is in Southeast Europe. People often think of it as Eastern Europe. Actually, it's kind of Mediterranean, because although the people look quite Eastern, in inverted commas, so they come across as looking hard, and very kind of non-smiling. But it's interesting because the men, they're big, they're shaven-headed, but they hug you. They're lovely, and it's, they've got a very Mediterranean type of vibe about them, and they're very generous as well, despite all the things that we've heard about Serbia, especially during the atrocities of the 90s. In general, they are lovely people, and I was very taken the first time I turned up, thinking that I wouldn't like them, and in the end, I was taken to their hearts, and I also took them to my heart. When I first came to Serbia, I did some birding around Belgrade, and I was actually invited to set up urban birding watch spot from the top of a building which was officially, or used to be in the past, officially the communist headquarters. And it was about maybe 500 or 600 feet above the city and overlooking the river Danube. And I had a group of people with me. Most of them were not birders, but that's not a problem, because I love talking to people who are not birders. And we had to sort of go through the motions in terms of, oh, I live there, and my aunt lives there, my mum lives there. Once we got over that, people started looking at birds, and we saw many species, including Caspian gulls and also urban white-tailed eagles, which was fantastic. But anyway, the next time I came, I was taken north, right to the border near to Hungary, and my guide was showing me all sorts of birds that you would also see in Hungary and Romania, like bee-eaters and like European rollers and things like that. And then we went to a park, an urban park, because he realized that I needed a bit of an urban fix. And we walked through this park, with, wooded park, looked up, and there in the tree was a long-eared owl, which for me was, whoa! I've not seen many long-eared owls up until that point. In the UK, they're very shy birds, and I could count the number of times I've seen them on one hand. So to see one was great. And my guide called, he's a great, he can make impersonations of bird sounds, and he called at the owl and it came and looked at us. But then I looked around and there were 22 nesting pairs. This was during the spring, 22 pairs nesting in wicker baskets out in the open, in nest boxes, in a rookery with common rooks and common kestrels, maybe 30 pairs of common kestrel, which in itself was quite a large number. I've never come across that before, all nesting colonially, alongside red-footed falcons. And I remember asking my guide, I said, how come there's so many long-eared owls? I mean, I was nearly faint. I couldn't, seeing so many owls in one go, I felt very giddy. He said, well, firstly, we put up nest boxes for them, and they really take to them immediately. And the reason why there's so many owls here is the fact that the farming methods here resemble what Britain was 200 years ago. So it's not very intensive. It's very low intensive farming. They don't cut all the crops. They leave a lot of grain on the floor. The barns have no walls, so there's grain everywhere. And as a result, there's rodents all over the place. It's like a rodent, rodent heaven there. And during the day, these rodents are fed upon by kestrels, and by night, they're fed upon by owls, long-eared owls. So later that year, in the winter, I came back with a bunch of people who had never seen an owl before. And we landed in Belgrade in the evening, drove up north to a hotel near a town called Kikinda. And we had dinner. And in the evening, we went out for a walk in the park that surrounded the hotel. And of course, someone spotted an owl. Oh my God, there's a long-eared owl. It's amazing. I was thinking, you haven't seen anything yet. The following day, we visited a few places and we walked around the streets of these towns, and there were long-eared owls practically in almost every tree. And for every one owl you saw, there were 2 or 3 more. Sometimes if you approach a tree too closely, or if a local walked past, the tree would explode with owls. And it was incredible to see the variety in terms of, they're all the same species, but they all have different expressions. Some look very mean, some look like you want to stroke them. They're just absolutely fabulous birds. And I was just smitten. I mean, I've actually lead a tour every year to see these owls during the winter for 4 days. And every year I look forward to seeing these guys. And it feels almost like the first time, because it's just an amazing phenomenon to see so many owls. And basically I missed it last year with the pandemic. I was very upset that no one could travel, and I was worrying for the owls. And they can even be found in very urban backgrounds like this one on a washing line. But anyway, we journeyed to a place called Kikinda, which now is called the owl capital of the world. But I remember going there 12 years ago for the first time, and looking up and seeing these owls and thinking, wow, my jaw was dropping. And we're in the middle of an urban area, and people come up to me, locals, and say to me, what's the matter? And I'm saying, look, these people, the locals, took the owls for granted. And actually, prior to this whole discovery of the fact that owls were there, they used to even kill them in the past because they saw them as birds of doom. So my good friend now, my brother, my Serbian brother, Milan, who's also the president of the Serbian BirdLife organization, he went about firstly educating the local people and also counting the number of owls in the region. And he found that the region itself, the whole of northern Serbia, during the winter, may have a population in excess of 25,000 long-eared owls. And this particular spot, this town with a town square, which is where these birds are, which basically has a few trees and has shops and churches and stuff. This particular town square has a collection of owls building from mid-December until early March. And the record number was 800. 800 long-eared owls sitting in trees above your head. It's just something that, you know, even now I can't get my head around. It's just phenomenal. So back then, I was greeted not with scorn, but with kind of, what are you doing? Now, it's a whole different thing. Now, there are shops selling owl paraphernalia. Now, the local people recognize the fact that the owls are here and important for ecotourism. And also, the long-eared owl is called Sova in Serbian. So they've renamed Sovember, and they have the kids in primary schools dressing up as owls and doing owl-related exercises during that month to educate them about the owls. Fantastic. And the best of all, the government have made that square, that town square, a nature reserve, the first of its kind in the world. And it just shows you that you don't need to be in the middle of nowhere to see amazing things. You can be in the middle of somewhere, right under our noses. And it goes back to what I said right at the very beginning of this conversation, this talk. And that is that we need to view the world that we live in, including the urban areas, in the way that wildlife and birds would see it. And if we can create situations like this particular situation is a happy accident, the fact that the trees in the outlying countryside have been cut down, you know, the last 40 years to make way for farmland, but there are still trees within the actual urban area. And the fact that within an urban area, you've got the heat island effect, in that the temperature within the urban area is often 5 to 6 degrees, even 7 degrees higher than the countryside. It's a happy accident. The owls decided to come and roost in the towns and cities, and they also got some form of protection as well, because they weren't hunted by people in the countryside. And now they are the object of ecotourism. I could talk about this all day. It's just an amazing thing, and it just shows me, and it gives me hope and makes me stronger, knowing that urban birding has such an important role to play within the world of conservation. Because at the end of the day, most people live in urban areas, and they are the people that we should be talking to. They are the people that we should be connecting to. They are the people that we should be creating this conservation army with. They are the people that we can influence by showing them the wildlife that's on their doorstep, so that they feel, even though they may not become experts, that's fine. Even though they may not know all the names of the birds and other animals, that's fine. But they'll have an empathy towards nature, so that when they're called upon, when, you know, an animal's in danger of extinction, or there's some problem in terms of the destruction of habitat, they will understand that this area needs protection. They will be the first people to dip their hands into their pocket. They'll be the first people to be out in the streets and campaigning for wildlife. So that's what we should be doing. And that's why I feel urban birding and appreciation of urban wildlife is so important. So before I go, I just want to add one last final thing, and that is I have created an Urban Birder World membership community, and I'd love you all to be members. There's thousands of different people, obviously members now, but you can get discounts on various products and services, and there's online courses, and there's all sorts of things going on. And I've got a special offer for all the people watching today. You can join for 20 English pounds, or whatever equivalent is in whatever country you're in, for 1 year, and it will be value for money. And plus, we can start building this conservation army to get people around the world united to look after our birds and other wildlife. There's 3 different membership tiers. You've got the bronze-winged jacana, the silvery grebe, and the golden oriole. Come look at the website, check it out, tell me what you think. It'll be fantastic to have you on board so we can keep talking and keep this conversation and conservation going. So I'd like to thank you all for your time today, and I hope that I've inspired you a little bit to get outside and to look up. Thank you very much.
What a lovely presentation. So I've posted your link here in the chat box. And the people who are from India, I'll tell you, 20 pound is just 2,000 rupees, which is nothing. Yeah. So go for it. So, so David, we have now a few questions for you. The people are asking. I'll read one by one. Dominic Standing is asking, one second. Hi, David. My 2 favorite patch experiences are in northeast Scotland, where I lived for 20 years. We always had 9-10 lapwings in the summer. And then one spring day, I saw a large flock of lapwing fly in. The flock circled a few times, calling, and 9 birds dropped out of the flock into the fields, and rest moved on. The flock dropping off group for summer?
Well, it depends. I mean, did those 9 birds, Dominic, actually stay and breed? Did you actually see them breed? And also, when you said during the summer, one spring day you saw them.
Yeah, one spring day.
I mean, there could be, a group of birds that have been wintering in the area and then are basically moving back to where they breed, which could be anywhere. It could be, further south. It could even be, in Europe. So it could have been a case of, all traveling together, and we'll drop you off. We're carrying on, on our journey. So it could be that as well.
So Alo from Delhi is asking, David, why do these eagles swift down on the docks in my park during the daytime in Vasant Kunj, which is in Delhi, southwest? Are they hungry, wanting to kill them?
Okay, when you say eagles, are they eagles? I mean, I'm not totally familiar with the bird of prey situation in Delhi, but I would imagine there'll be black kites possibly swooping down.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, that is an interesting one, because I wouldn't, if it's black kites, I wouldn't think they'd be going after your dog as a piece of prey, because black kites tend to scavenge more than anything else. But it happens across the world. People say that they've been swooped upon by various creatures like gulls and other birds of prey, and often it's because you are too close to their nest, or it may be something that's misinterpreted as a swoop. There might be something that's completely innocent, but is then looked upon as being an aggressive piece of behaviour. I remember once being on the radio on the BBC in Britain, and there was some lawyers who were working, some very high-end lawyers working in an area called Lincoln Inns Fields, which is a very historic part of the financial district of central London. And they were complaining that whenever they went into a local park for lunch, they'd be swooped upon by gulls, and they were being attacked. And I said, my response was, there might be lawyers, but they're liars, because a gull is not going to be swooping down and risking injuring itself for the sake of, unless you're right close to its nest, which you're not. Because once the bird's injured, it's game over. They cannot function anymore. So often these signs of aggression are just signs. They very rarely make contact, but it's enough to make us scared, and obviously then say, "Oh, we've been attacked," and then it ends up in the newspaper, some stupid story, certainly in the UK anyway. So yeah, it'd be interesting to learn more about your experience when regarding that incident.
Okay, so Victor, David, sorry. So I'm reading the next question. Victor, you is asking, David, have you ever met strangers when you do city birding who have never watched birds and then become keen birders later after talking to you? Share your experience.
To be honest, this happened all my life. I've ranges from people saying, after meeting or hanging out with me, anytime they walk out now and they hear a bird, they think they actually notice a bird now, which is great. But there's been many people I've met who, for example, I gave a talk in London to the Women's Institute. The Women's Institute is an organisation formed, I think, after the First or Second World War, and it was originally about making jam and knitting sweaters and stuff like that. It's become much more modern now, but that's the interpretation of it by most people who are not involved in it. So I remember going to this meeting to talk to these ladies, expecting them all to be in their 90s, and sleeping and knitting and things like that. When I turned up, most of them were under 30, and some of them were beautiful. And what was great was I said to them, listen, guys, let's stop this here. Let's go for a walk. So I took them all for a walk in the streets. And I remember walking to a place called Southwark, and there's the Tate Modern Museum, not museum, art gallery, Tate Modern Art Gallery, world famous. And I showed them a peregrine there. I showed them great tits and blue tits and others, magpies and stuff like that. And they were enthralled. And I remember going back to the room to finish off the talk, and they were really excited. And then weeks later, 2 or 3 of them wrote back to me and said, I bought a pair of binoculars. I really want to get into this birding now, and some of them I'm in contact with to this day. And that talk was 9-8 years ago. So I think it doesn't take much to get people engaged. I think the biggest stumbling block is that people think that they have to be an expert. And that's my problem sometimes with what I see on television or reading the newspapers. They make it seem as if you have to be an expert, or you have to live in the countryside, or you have to go to this particular place. And what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to do any of those things. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to know the names of anything. There's no level to be to. There's no examination to take. The only thing you need to do is to open your heart and open your mind to the idea that there's nature around you. That's all you need, nothing more. And I think everyone has access to that.
So David, Nishant Venugopal is asking, is there any place that you would like to visit next as urban birder?
Yeah, I've never really had a wish list, because I realized early on that, if you wish for things, then you have to be careful for what you wish for. For example, when I first became the urban birder, which was 15 years ago, I was thinking, I want to go there, I want to go here, I want to go there. And then all of a sudden, you're going to all those places and you're thinking, whoa, this is too much. This is too much. I want to slow down. So now I don't think of anything. If I get invited somewhere, it's amazing. There's a few places I like to go to. Mongolia is one place I've always wanted to go to. There's something magical about there. And also some of the stans, maybe not maybe not Afghanistan, but certainly the other stans I'd be really interested to see. But I'm happy to go anywhere. And I'd love to come back to India as well. My first experience of India wasn't what I expected. I want to see it properly, so I'd love to come back. But for me, I'm happy to go anywhere, and I've always been there. Ever since I was a child, I was happy even just to go to the local park, even to walk out the door, just look out the window. I'm happy. And part of that was because I always felt I didn't have time. I need to make most of my time. So I don't worry about where I go, because in the end of the day, anything can turn up anywhere at any time. So if you have that in your mind, then anywhere is amazing.
Great. So thank you, David. Now I think the time is already over now, and we will say goodbye to all our friends. Thank you so very much for a great presentation and a great show. And we are looking forward to see you in India soon.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you very much for the invitation, guys. And thank you all, the attendees, for being here as well. Really appreciate that. Hope you enjoy. Thank you. And don't forget, keep looking up.
Yes. So, okay, guys, We are just going off now, and keep watching our future webinars. We'll be coming few very interesting webinars this month, and the links are posted here. And I also request you to join our Facebook community. My colleague has posted the link. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night. Namaste.
Thank you. Good night.